Well, hello class, welcome back. Really excited to share a couple of videos with you as we continue to think about how we can help understand the lives of emerging adults. Now, you remember, you've seen this slide before. We've been talking about the fact that emerging adulthood is a decade of transition. There are a lot of things that emerging adults are trying to negotiate between age 18 and 30. And this list here is more than just a list. This is a list that we've really begun to look at as we've begun to really try to look at the research and try to understand what are the topics that emerging adults are starting to negotiate and really trying to come to grips with as they move toward this important age of traction, which is 30. Now, think about this again for a second. If you are talking with an emerging adult, if an emerging adult shows up at your house or at your church or at a conversation that you have, and all these things are in their head, how do you help them? Where do you begin? This is where I find that a lot of ministry leaders have a lot of problems. They just don't know what to do. So a lot of times the default is let's have a program. Let's try to get them all to show up on a Friday night or whatever, which isn't necessarily bad. It just doesn't necessarily begin to get at the heart and the core of the things that emerging adults really want to talk about, really want to explore, really want to navigate, and try to get some support along the way. Now, a few lectures ago, we talked about this need for empathy, this ability to not only just sort of do things for young adults, which in many ways programs can almost distance us, right? If I can do something for you, then I don't really have to get close to you and I don't have to approach you. Where empathy really challenges us and inspires us and gives us the heart to actually step closer to those that we want to serve. We talked about the problem of barriers that can get in the way for empathy, but we really need to turn the corner and start to talk about, well, how can we actually implement empathy? What does that begin to look like? And this is where a conceptual framework that we've used a lot at the Fuller Youth Institute in our research methodologies is really thinking about these lenses of identity, belonging, and purpose. Now, identity, belonging, and purpose are really, really crucial because we believe that young people are actually on a quest to really understand their identity, belonging, and purpose. Now, this quest isn't just for young people, it's for people. We all are trying to negotiate our identity, belonging, and purpose. But what's unique about emerging adults is this. For adolescents who are searching out their identity, belonging, and purpose, this is sort of a new endeavor for them. And in one aspect, there's a little bit of play associated with it. They don't necessarily have to commit in their teenage years to their identity, belonging, and purpose. They're starting to think about it. Their brains are starting to think abstractly. So this is sort of new for them, but it still doesn't have necessarily the weight associated with it. So in many ways, for emerging adults, the first time they really have to take seriously these questions of identity, belonging, and purpose is in their 20s. This is when, as we've talked about before, they're sort of stepping into a world where they have more options. They have more agency. Their brains are developed, and they're actually making choices educationally, vocationally, relationally, that can have an impact on their future lives in significant ways. So you might begin to sense that these questions of identity, belonging, and purpose for emerging adults are really, really significant. It's the first time in their human lives that they've actually had to really think hard about these questions. They recognize the fact that this is very exciting. It also takes a lot of work, and it also has real life implications along the way. So sometimes I'll have a 50-year-old say to me, well, I'm thinking about identity, belonging, and purpose. I'm asking questions about this. And I'll remind them that they are, but they're not asking them in a serious manner for the first time. And the older we get, the more social capital we have. We have more experience. We have more relational, financial, social capital that we can lean on. So the pressure isn't as great because we have other resources that we can tap into. But for an emerging adult, these questions are deep and profound and incredibly raw because they really have a lot of significance for them. So how do we think about identity, belonging, and purpose for emerging adults? Let me just give you three really important looks that I want you to think about, because I think this will be really important as we continue to understand emerging adults. First of all, when it comes to identity, you've probably heard this before, it really asks this question of who am I? Now, I would define this in this way, that identity is a set of beliefs concerning who one is in relation to one's personal attributes, relationships, and group affiliations. Now, think about what this means for an emerging adult. For an emerging adult, I'm finally realizing what I've inherited. I'm thinking about who I am, as I've mentioned before, through the lens of gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious heritage, cultural backgrounds, socioeconomic status. All these factors are sort of stepping into the space. So this question of who am I is me trying to put together an identity that actually is less singular and much more plural. It's my identities. How do I harmonize all these different aspects of who I am? What am I bringing forward from what I've inherited from those that have raised me, or my culture, or my community, or my ancestors? What am I bringing forward? And at the same time, what am I going to take with me as I continue to move on? Really important questions for emerging adults. Now, also, this idea of belonging is really, really important, because it's asking the question, where do I fit? Now, the way we define it is this way. It's a sense that one is connected to and can trust a community in which one can exert influence, have one's needs met, and mutually share emotional connection with others. Now, what's unique about this definition, and I think a lot of people get wrong, is this, is that a lot of times when we think about belonging, we only think about the connection period element. Like, well, if you feel like you belong, you belong. Like, so a lot of times we find this in faith communities. You'll hear this this call of, "Hey, you are welcome here. We really want you here. We really want you to be a part of our community," which is true and which is good. The problem is this: is that welcome isn't enough. For one to feel like they belong, one has to feel welcomed. And one has to feel as though they have a voice in their community, that when they speak or do something or contribute or invest in the community, they actually believe that somehow they're making a difference in the community and making it better. And this is where a lot of times we have a disconnect with young people in the church, where churches are like, "You're welcome here." But once young adults show up in the church, a lot of times they are asked to be silent about their questions. Their friends aren't necessarily invited in, and emerging adults can feel as though they don't really have a voice in the community. When that happens, they don't feel like they belong. Sure, they're welcome, but they don't have a voice. So this idea of connection and exerting influence are two elements that are crucial for one to feel like they belong. Then there's also the element of purpose. This is where we ask the question, well, what difference can I make? This is a commitment to a meaningful goal that leads to behavior that works toward this goal. A question that I like to ask emerging adults a lot as I work with them, my students, the people that I try to mentor, is I'm always asking this question: what's your gift to the world and how are you developing it? Now, notice there's two elements to that I think are really important. First of all, I'm acknowledging the fact that you have a gift, that emerging adults have a gift. And I think sometimes even for emerging adults to admit that is really, really hard, because it feels so tentative, or it's not very humble or whatever, but you all have a gift. You all need to know that. Like right now, if anything else, like from this video, you have a gift, right? But then the second question is really important, right? It's a decade of investment. So you have a gift. What's your gift, and how are you developing it to make a difference in the world, right? So the goal then is to name the gift and then inspire emerging adults to recognize the fact that part of their calling, their goal, their purpose is to develop that gift so that they can make the world a better place. Identity, belonging, purpose, who am I, where do I fit, and what difference can I make? Now, why are these important? Well, when we get to this idea of thinking about how we want to support emerging adults, I think what we have to recognize the fact is that we almost have to have these lenses in the sort of the back of our minds as we're talking with emerging adults. Because when I interact with emerging adults, I know, how can I practice listening to their quest for identity, belonging, and purpose? Emerging adults aren't just sharing random things with us. They're actually fueled by these questions of who am I, where do I fit, and what difference can I make? And if we can listen for those things, we can have a deeper appreciation of what they're going through, what they're struggling with, where they feel stuck, where they feel anxious. We begin now to have lenses to take all those categories that I showed you at the beginning of this video and actually recognize the fact that maybe they actually have more precise categories that can help us support them where they say they need us the most, okay? Also, I think we have to just be really honest with ourselves. What questions am I asking myself about my own quest for identity, belonging, and purpose? Perhaps these are really deep questions that you're asking right now as you're a student at Fuller, or you're thinking about your vocation, or you're in a relationship. Like, what does it mean for me to make a difference in the world? What does it mean where I feel like I fit or I belong? What does it mean for me to really take stock in my identity? Really important questions that help us begin to really understand emerging adults and their quests that are also, as we'll talk in the future, deeply, deeply spiritual. Hope that helps.